from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
The West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, working with students and families to improve college access and student success for a better West Virginia.
This is the Legislature Today. Joining us this evening are Senate President Mitch Carmichael and Speaker of the House Tim Armstead. Thank you both for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great to be here.
Now, President Carmichael, you gave some passionate floor remarks today regarding Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Would you mind sharing your message with us?
Well, I think it was appropriate on Martin Luther King Day, who stood against racism, discrimination, or segregation of any type, to call attention to a bill that we have been discussing in the legislature that essentially makes community and technical college available and affordable for every West Virginian. Because the message, the analogy was that the great divide in our society now is that between the privileged and the underprivileged. Those from relatively affluent scenarios, and those who maybe haven't been born into the to an affluent family. And we want every West Virginian. We desperately want every West Virginian to have a skill set, a trade, an education that they can take to the marketplace, to the job market, and gain gainful employment. It helps that individual and we feel a moral responsibility essentially to help these people gain that skill set, to lift themselves from the cycle of poverty in our state. And so I thought it was appropriate. I felt like it was the right time to call attention to that divide between those who are educated, those who have relative ease of opportunity, although nothing's easy in life. But for those who have a different aspiration, that want to trade a skill and maybe don't want to go to a four-year institution, we want to help those people realize their dreams as well.
And I understand that there are some differences between the Senate and the House as well. You had talked previously about expanding Promise. What are the differences between the House and the Senate as far as community colleges go?
Well, first of all, I would say that we certainly agree that we need to take steps to make community college and trade schools much more accessible to our citizens. So I don't think there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate or the governor in terms of the goal of doing that. It's just a matter of sitting down and trying to work through some of the details of exactly how we do that. We currently have a Promise Scholarship program that requires that the students show a certain skill set, a certain aptitude before they receive that scholarship. And I think that there's just some interest in the House in making sure that we have some of the same standards, not necessarily that they have to meet the same requirements, because I think there are aptitude tests and other tests that can be applied to some of the skill sets that someone who might want to go to a community or technical college or perhaps go into heating and cooling or mechanics, that they may take a different test or show a different set of aptitudes to be able to show that they are hitting that achievement level like we do in Promise Scholarship. But I think that, again, I think it's a matter of just working out the details of how we go about doing that to make sure that people really can go to college, go to the four-year college, go to community college, trade school, whatever their goals are, and that the fact that they may not have the money to do that shouldn't be the thing that stops them from doing that.
Right, and that helps not only the individual, but the entire economy of West Virginia. Because you imagine what it costs when someone is unable to work because they don't have a skill set or a trade that they can take to the marketplace. It's very expensive, and it perpetuates that cycle of poverty. We want to break that and have a trained, educated, drug-free workforce that not only West Virginia employers, but American employers and the world's investment community looks to West Virginia to come here and say they've got it figured out in West Virginia. Everyone's educated, they're drug-free, and they're ready to go to work.
I believe too that there were some residency requirements as well. That was being discussed.
Yeah, one of the great aspects of the program, I believe, is a couple things. Those who receive the scholarship would be drug tested. They perhaps maybe have to have some community service requirements they give back to the community. And furthermore, that there would be a post-graduation residency requirement so that you either pay the scholarship back or you're in West Virginia earning a living, paying taxes, and contributing to the economy in our state.
Now, another thing that's been discussed is the business inventory tax and eliminating that. How are plans shaping in the House and Senate?
Well, first of all, I would say that this is one of those taxes. If we go back 20 to 30 years in our history of our state, and we've been looking at what are those roadblocks that are keeping people from getting put back to work. And one of those things is our tax structure. And there were three basic areas where we've looked at for over 30 years that we're really not competitive in. We've addressed some of those issues, but one of the ones that we still have not addressed, and I've got with me here a copy of the Governor's Commission on Fair Taxation from Governor Underwood's administration in 1999 that talks about the need to eliminate the equipment inventory tax in order to create jobs in our state. And so we've been talking about this for over 20 years. And two tax studies have looked at this and both concluded that this was a problem in our tax structure. So this is a tax that other states don't charge. It's a tax that is so bad in West Virginia that when we try to attract a manufacturing company or an inventory company to the state, we find some workaround to make sure that they don't have to pay it, but every other business does. So it's important, I think, that we do that. We have, I believe, a plan now in place that we can do this without hurting counties and school systems, which no one wants to do. And I think it's the first time that I really see a true prospect of being able to move forward to eliminate this tax, which kills jobs in our state.
Yeah, the Speaker's 100% correct on this. This tax has been identified by every independent entity that studies the West Virginia tax code as the single biggest job-killing tax in the state. And so when we see something like that, we said, let's find a way to get rid of this onerous, burdensome tax that costs West Virginia jobs, money, and opportunity. So I think there's a united front to finally get rid of this tax and do the right thing and put some West Virginians to work by eliminating this tax.
Let me just say, if I could, this would be a constitutional amendment. The people of West Virginia would have the opportunity to vote on this before it went forward. And I think that we certainly can make the case to the people of our state that this will help them be able to bring their children, their grandchildren back to West Virginia and create additional jobs that give them that opportunity. So I'm very excited about it. I think it's the closest we've come in talking about it for over 2 decades to truly moving forward with it.
And this money goes to the counties. I know it's like $20 million a year, which would represent that loss. And this goes to funding for schools. What are we going to do to keep the counties whole?
Well, you'll see as the Speaker alluded to, in the constitutional amendment, there will be an absolute guarantee to the counties of that money each year. The money that they're currently collecting will be guaranteed going forward in perpetuity. So the counties are absolutely protected. And the school system.
I think you'll see. I think you'll start to see some of those opponents in the past coming forward and saying that they support this. We've talked with a number of representatives from counties that have had serious concerns in the past, but now are supportive of this approach. And so we're again, I think there's momentum moving forward. There's still some things to work out, but again, this goes back to the people of West Virginia to decide if they believe this is an important thing for us to move forward with.
Now, switching gears, there's a lot of optimism regarding the budget situation this year. In December, revenue was ahead of estimates.
Yeah, there is a lot of that'll create a lot of optimism when revenue's ahead of estimates. And the things that we've put in place over the last 3-4 years to move West Virginia and to turn it in the direction of a pro-growth, pro-jobs, pro-business state are beginning to come to fruition. And I want to commend the governor as well for coming in as a newly elected governor and changing the executive branch to implement those policies at the executive level as well as at the legislative level. So I think the people of West Virginia have a great team in place, I think, to move the state forward, and we're beginning to see the results.
I've interviewed John Deskins with he's the director of WVU's Bureau of Business and Economic Research. And he said while we are experiencing improved revenue numbers and there is some reason for optimism, West Virginia does still have some challenges to face. Do you fear that there's too much optimism and that we're not focusing on our challenges enough?
I don't think so at all. I believe in realistic optimism. That's the term that I've used, which is, we have reasons to be optimistic, but that doesn't mean we've solved all these challenges, and no one's saying that. And I think we have to be very cautious about increasing spending in other areas, or looking at ways where we feel like that simply because we now have what I believe is a balanced budget doesn't mean that we have this excess money that we'll start spending. Everyone recognizes that, but at the same time, when you compare last year when we were talking about a $500 million hole in the budget versus this year when we're talking about a balanced budget, I think that is a reason to be optimistic, because that shows that we have really turned the corner, we're moving in the right direction. At the same time, I think that encourages us to take those steps that you're talking about to ensure that we continue in the right direction. It doesn't mean that we're going to rest or that we're going to say all things have been accomplished. We're going to talk about what that gives us an opportunity to do in the future to truly ensure that we put our people back to work. So I'm very optimistic, but again, realistically optimistic in a sense that we realize there's still a lot of work to do.
Deskins also mentioned too that there are other factors that contribute to low workforce participation, which West Virginia ranks worst in the country with workforce participation. One of those is the drug abuse epidemic. Now, fighting the opioid epidemic is going to take an investment in new dollars. Where does that money come from?
Well, I'll point out that last year we put an additional $20 million into drug treatment facilities and drug, treating those who are addicted to this horrible condition. So even in the worst budget year, we were able to find $20 million for that and recognize the importance of it. But I'll also point out that an improving economy will also do a lot to help alleviate the drug problems, because now you have hope, opportunity, growth, and a real prospect for jobs. As well as, and I'll keep coming back to the community and technical college element of that, because you have someone now who has a skill set and a dream and a goal. And so when you have those things in place, I think it lessens the allure of drugs and opioids, and certainly the abuse. But having said all that, we are also committed to continuing an investment in drug treatment and opioid reduction acts.
If I could just to add to that, in addition to the over $20 million we put in last year, the President has declared a state of emergency in relation to this opioid epidemic throughout our country. And as part of that, has freed up additional federal funding, roughly about $30 million over the next year, that could not previously be used for drug treatment, that it can be used in West Virginia for drug treatment. So I think that our partnership with the federal effort is going to really allow us to be able to tackle this in a way we've never been able to do so before. And I think a lot of the things we've been doing over the last year dovetail with what the President and what the federal administration is doing to fight this epidemic, and everyone is taking it incredibly seriously.
So let's talk about West Virginia's booming oil and gas industry and a pending deal with China. Almost 5 months after this confidential MOU was announced by the governor, we still don't have any specifics. What have you heard about this?
In terms of specifics, I think we're still vague on the absolute specifics of the $83 billion investment, but I wouldn't expect any less, or any more, I should say. I mean, when you're talking an investment of $83 billion, I don't think you're going to see it come to fruition in a 5-month time frame. And so I think it sends an unmistakable message that the state of West Virginia is now perhaps ground zero for worldwide investment in energy resources and some other elements of investment. And so couldn't be more excited about this opportunity. And so, as we continue to see it unfold, there'll be more details around that. But at this point, it's I think structured in the proper manner.
I think the President's exactly right, and we've had the opportunity, both President Carmichael and I, to meet with representatives of the Chinese government and the company that's looking to do this investment. And I truly believe that they see West Virginia for what it is, which is a tremendous opportunity in the natural gas arena. And So I'm excited about it. I understand people may be reluctant when you talk about a multi-billion-dollar investment like we're talking about. Mitch is exactly right. It's not going to happen overnight, but they are serious about this, and I truly believe we will see jobs created in our state. We'll see work that comes to our citizens as a result of this that's going to be exciting for our state.
I'll just add, and it's sort of kind of a funny story, but at the governor's mansion, the Chinese delegation led the entire, everyone in the governor's mansion in a rendition of Almost Heaven, West Virginia. So, not that dovetails into investment, but it certainly lets you know they know where we are.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you being here.
It's our pleasure.
Great to be with you.
Next, a new feature this session that we're calling I'd Like to Know. We're taking your questions directly to those here at the Capitol who can provide some answers. Here's a question from a local social worker.
My name's Felicia Rourke, and I'm from St. Albans, West Virginia. And from our lawmakers, I want to know, how are we addressing the accessibility of mental health services? Because my patients are suffering, waiting 3 months to access psychiatric outpatient services, as well as crisis intervention services into mental health hospitals.
Well, as you're aware, psychiatric and mental health issues are a broad range. We've been trying to deal with our substance abuse problems, which is also part of that, but also making accessibility for mental health. You may be aware that under our Medicaid program, DHHR has tried to put psychiatric and mental health issues into the MCOs, the managed care organizations that we have for Medicaid, making it accessible for people to be in certain centers and get outpatient treatments. So that's one avenue that we've done to make it more accessible. We've also tried, there are only so many centers throughout the state. We're also trying to look at making facilities available, particularly from our substance abuse issues, for treatment centers for people to be able to obtain treatments. So those are areas we've been working on actively.
We want to hear from more of you. Post your video questions to our Twitter or Facebook accounts with the hashtag WVI'dLikeToKnow, or send an email to WVI'dLikeToKnow@wvpublic.org. Joining me now is senior reporter Dave Misich. Dave, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks.
So first off, we've had a pretty busy day today. We've had the election of state school board members come up. We've also had 100 single-member districts. But first, it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
That's right. And in the House, you heard a few comments, particularly Delegate Fleshauer from Mon County. She got up and spoke about the importance of this day. Also, Pat McGee and a few other delegates got up and spoke about the importance of this day. Senate President Mitch Carmichael got up and made those comments, as you discussed earlier. Earlier, though, today we heard we had a march from Asbury United Methodist Church and made its way to the Capitol, and we'll go ahead and take a look at some video from that right now.
Here we go.
I think it's important for people of West Virginia to see folks walking down the street and reminding them that, freedom is always a struggle. It never stops. Because there's always going to be somebody in the world who's going to attack our way of life. So we have to make sure that we stay vigilant when it comes to showing that freedom is important.
Now, there were several other things that had gone on today, too. Like I mentioned, one of them was Senate Joint Resolution 7, which involves the legislature's power to oversee how the Board of Education is governed.
That's right, and one element of that would be, as we've heard about in the House, there's a joint resolution over there in the House Delegate Espinoza is working that bill in House Education, or that resolution in House Education that deals with the election of state school board members. Senator Boso over here in the Senate introduced a joint resolution that is a little bit broader than what the election resolution over in the House does, but it does have that element in there. And earlier today, I spoke to Senator Boso, and he explained various aspects of that, particularly in terms of the election of state school board members. And if we could take a look at that right now.
Well, certainly, how that final structure comes out. The election of Board of Education members. Anytime that you have an election, obviously there's going to be money involved in that. But it's obviously a way for us to find a way to better meet the educational needs of the various areas of our state. What we find happening in the Eastern Panhandle, for instance, might be very different than the educational needs of Southern West Virginia, in Logan or Mingo counties. So we want to make sure that we address all of those various perspectives in the way that we, whether elect or select our State Board of Education members.
Now, as you mentioned, the House Joint Resolution 24 is a little bit different than the Senate. One aspect of it is that 6 of 9 board members are elected, and it also has some rulemaking authority with it as well.
That's right, and of course there's some opposition to this, particularly from the teachers union. They're really concerned about the political nature of electing state school board members, how much money gets involved. As of now, it is it's worked by congressional district and party as well. So there is some concern, like I said, particularly from the teachers union. Christine Campbell is the president of the American Federation of Teachers here in West Virginia, and here's what she had to say about some of the issues they have with that particular issue.
Well, right now the makeup of the school board is by congressional district and by party, so they balance those things out. And we, of course, want accountability and transparency, but we want a balance. And where we talk about people on the school board, at one time there were no educators left on the school board. So we want to ensure that anything that is done makes it possible for educators to be on the school board, because those are the folks who really understand what's happening in public education. So when you talk about elections, more and more we have people going into office based on how much money they can raise, how much advertising they can do, and we want to ensure that there's a balance between educators to make sure that, is it about money? Is it about how you get elected, who has the most money, or is it going to be about what is really best for education and our students?
So we also had some interesting developments in House Judiciary today too, with the 100 single-member districts.
Right, that bill was on the agenda for this morning. They recessed, came back at 1:30. They eventually got to it. Long debate, long discussion on that bill in the House Judiciary Committee. Delegate Barbara Fleischauer raised some issues about the findings of fact, as is noted in the bill. And Delegate Hanshaw is the vice chair of that committee. He proposed an amendment that was passed that removed that language, cut the bill down, whittled it down to essentially just a single paragraph at this point. There was also another amendment that was proposed by Delegate Mike Pushkin that wound up failing, but that amendment proposed a nonpartisan commission to be responsible for drawing these maps. Of course, they're looking at 100 districts and single members per district. That amendment wound up failing on a party line vote, and the bill passed out of committee on a party line vote as well. So this will be an interesting thing to watch. One of the things to note that was mentioned in the original version of the bill is that West Virginia is one of only 10 states across the country that have multi-member districts. and West Virginia and New Hampshire are the only 2 states with 3 or more multi-member districts in their particular houses. So it's going to be something to watch. We'll see what happens, it being election year, and all this is going to be based, if it passes and goes through, based on the U.S. Census in 2020. So.
And it's a constitutional amendment as well.
I don't believe so, but I think that we'll take a look at that and be sure later on. So.
You're right. Yeah, it's a very interesting issue for sure, though.
Right.
But thank you so much for joining me tonight.
No problem.
That's it for tonight's program. Join us tomorrow at 6 p.m. as we speak with the chairman of the House and Senate Finance Committees. Also, an in-depth look at the impact of the opioid epidemic on West Virginia's foster care system. The number of children in the system has skyrocketed. That's tomorrow evening, and an entire program focusing on the state's opioid crisis on Wednesday evening. For the Legislature Today on West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Andrea Lanham. Thanks for watching and have a good evening.